Hi, my name is Kevin Oliveira. I'm the Senior Product Marketing Manager for Data Security Solutions at Forcepoint. And today I'm going to be joined by Abdul Pasha, Director of Professional Services at Forcepoint. And we will be talking to you today about how to deploy DLP and how we're able to simplify deployment. Abdul, could you introduce yourself?
Yeah, thanks, Kevin. Hi, everyone. My name is Abdul Pasha. I'm the Director for Professional Services within Forcepoint. Excited to talk about simplifying DLP deployment.
Great, thanks. One of the things about DLP, often customers, when they're looking at it, they have different reactions based on the complexity that DLP can have. And it is definitely true with many DLP solutions that are in the market today. To do a successful deployment of DLP where you're really creating value in terms of security, it can be extremely complex. And the thing is, with Forcepoint, we've designed a product that can be centrally managed across multiple channels. And so we've designed, and we have over 1,500 predefined classifiers and templates that allow for a very strong, relatively quick deployment, and being able to use all sorts of data identification through to machine learning and fingerprinting, as well as classifiers, all these different things. We've designed it so that it's out of the box ready. That's one of the key things that's important for a successful DLP deployment. Another is having the right partners, having the vendor in place that will work with you, that can transfer knowledge, that could help you in the steps to deployment. And then critically, and what we'll be talking mostly about today, both Abdul and I, is this aspect of the right plan. Having a good plan in place to do a deployment and the right steps, that skill of a strong plan, can make the difference between a very poor DLP deployment to an extremely successful one done in a way that's efficient and in using the time and resources that you have efficiently. We have it, our plan, the plan that we're going to be talking about today is a 6-stage strategy. I'm going to hand it off to Abdul, if you can go ahead and share what those 6 steps are. Overview.
Yeah, no, and just to kind of highlight and underscore, Kevin, sort of the problem statements and why we have these 6 strategies. We hear all the time from customers saying that there is that knowledge gap, and they think it's complex because the ROI isn't as fast. So how can we simplify it by making sure to have the customers that are deploying DLP for the first time or have a very limited footprint, have that knowledge gap shrunk, and then make sure that the ROI that they've just deployed is very quickly realized. Because DLP is policy-based, it can take some time, like you said. So with that in mind and hearing what our customers are saying, these are sort of the 6 stages for DLP success. Plan goals and use cases, scope and project initiation, understanding your data, policy lifecycle, deployment, and future roadmap as you go from phase 1 to phase 2. So, you always want to start with plan. The old adage, Carpenter says, sort of measure twice, cut once. That's how we want to approach it, right? Plan what your goals are. What are your short-term, long-term goals? What are your use cases? And sometimes it's compliance, sometimes it's IP protection, sometimes it's both. Is there a deadline that you're trying to hit? Knowing sort of the answers to a lot of those questions, or really asking those tough questions in the beginning, and then planning out what is important, what milestones and deliverables can really help you get a great ROI, helps people be on the same page. It reduces the complexity because now people are not disengaged, especially when you get different partners internally and externally.
Abdul, this seems like a particularly important step. I'm just wondering, what kind of challenges do you typically have, or have you faced when you're just trying to get this particular step completed? What makes it challenging?
Yeah, so DLP should really be looked at, Kevin, as a business driven tool. It really should be coming from board level, and not just sort of the CISO area. So sometimes we see where it's a security operations that's driving a lot of these use cases or plans. But what you want is you want HR, you want your sort of the board member engagement, because it's really a team effort. You're trying to protect data from the finance team, from the marketing team, trying to protect price list. And that's one of the things that we found, trying to get everybody, especially if it's a large multi-corporation, getting on them on the same page to understand what is important to each item. That's
interesting. I mean, that's as far as I definitely have. It's a business-wide deployment. It's not just a security or an IT issue. And then just how critical it is that you're able to get all of these different people involved and engaged. But that's critical to the success, and that's what I'm hearing.
Absolutely, and it does reduce the complexity, because now as a security professional, even though I'm responsible or maybe I'm accountable, I don't have to come up with what is important to marketing, what is important to legal. I'm not in those awkward positions. Right.
That's great. Yeah, moving ahead, this is looking across the different things that Forcepoint DLP is able to provide. And we do, as I mentioned before, there are DLP deployments where they just focus on email and then give you an email and an email security solution and DLP that works with that email. And they may be able to apply in different other ways, but really it's an email DLP washed solution. Ours is very centralized and cuts across multiple channels. We have 5 different channels that we list here: endpoint, email, network, web, and cloud. Giving centralized management, unified policies being that you can write one policy and deploy it across all 5. So you have that capability. Data protection service also, again, it can be enforced across all of these 5 different channels. We can enforce all of those policies. And then risk adaptive protection will be talked about a little bit more later, but the ability to proactively identify risk, so that this enables us then to be able to provide a DLP solution everywhere your users work and anywhere your data resides. So that's our goal with our solution.
Yeah, and Kevin, if we want to just go back once again, if I'm putting myself on a customer security analyst or security buyer, even a CISO, these are the channels where data exfiltration can happen. And if we don't want to, we certainly don't want to boil the ocean, because there's so much you can do with DLP, starting off with just even the endpoint and email. So because you have people working from home, and starting with email DLP, because that's where we still see the biggest vector, is a absolutely appropriate start. And like you said, once those policies are written for endpoint, we can apply them again on the email channel, on the network channel, on the cloud channel, etc. So it's okay if that comes as phase 2. Once again, complexity doesn't mean you have to do, or good doesn't mean you have to do all of it. Simple is hard at times, but starting with the endpoint and email is absolutely appropriate.
Yeah, that's great. Going ahead, as far as the scope and project initiation stuff, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, so this kind of ties into the planning stage, right? So, a lot of times we would get asked questions, well, who do I need on the calls? You're telling me, Abdul, that I need, buy-in for business? Well, having a project manager, having business analysts, compliance officers, certainly architects that know where all your other solutions are lying, from Exchange, SQL, AWS, systems engineer, DLP needs. Now, when someone sees this list, Kevin, it can be like, wait a minute, do I need a team? Do I need, 24 people, 24/7? That is a lot. Well, no, right? Because there are times where folks can do multiple duties. And a lot of times when we're helping them deploy, we're coaching them on how to do those jobs and functions. So not only that, there's automation sort of built in within some of the tools. We found that when we're deploying our DLP policies, knowing the use cases and employing the right policies can reduce the false positives. So you know what? You don't have to search for, a needle in a haystack. And, we can supplement a lot of the core team expertise that we've established from doing over, 500,000 deployments, if you will. So, but if I'm a customer, these are the skill sets is sort of what I would look for. And I would ask, the vendor and any partners like, hey, look, this is who I need in order to be successful and to risk and make it less complex.
So it sounds like in a deployment, you do have to identify the people that will be responsible for these different competencies. It could be completely within your own company. It could be also augmented by professional services where you're coming from. Could it, as far as like if you're a smaller company and you have a relatively small IT staff, because these all look like people typically within the IT, you've got a couple that are maybe wouldn't necessarily be directly in IT, but generally it's the IT staff. If it's a smaller staff, then how would you recommend a customer go about it?
Yeah. So, I would definitely say, you want to have then two separate items, someone that handles things on a system level and someone that handles the policies and reporting. If that's one person that can handle sort of managing the systems, and what I mean by systems, the database, the Windows updates, the patching, pushing out the agents, networking, etc. And then the other person within the application, the policy writing, exclusions within the rules, looking at the incidents. I think at the very minimum, it's sort of that type of, but then, what we can do is, depending on what vertical you have, and as you'll show it later, we have some built-in policy wizards. So there's some times when, look, I need to be HIPAA compliant. I really don't have a clear idea. I'm not a lawyer, I just play one. You can use sort of what's built into the system itself that's meant to help augment and simplify, some of the skill sets and really help bridge that gap.
Okay, so it sounds there's multiple, as far as from a people perspective, it's just making sure there are people responsible for each of these areas. Each of these areas is a specific skill activity that needs to happen in the overall deployment. And again, it can be augmented by the professional services people, so you do have that as well. I would think too, as far as if you have a large company, if it's a large deployment and one of our larger customers, you might have a team even on some of these things. Yeah, which would be, of course,
absolutely.
wonderful.
I mean, we've had customers with different language requirements. So even when the endpoint does a pop-up, I don't want it to be in English. I want it to be in Japanese. Or so one of the great things is that there's things built in within the tool itself that can help you, right, automate certain items, remediate certain items, but also, the large multinational corporations that have 24/7 different teams, different language support. That's what I really take joy in. It's they're being able to sort of hit a lot of different areas.
Great. This next one looks at as far as just the overall process, the 16-week process. Could you maybe speak to that as far as how this all works?
Yeah. So think of this as sort of an accordion, right, Kevin? And you and I have talked about it, and all the time we're trying to think of how can we quickly do a quick ROI. So as soon as you purchase, as soon as there's a demo done and you've made the purchase, I want to make sure you're enjoying your DLP and you're understanding we're bridging the knowledge gap. So really, week 16 is more of a average, if you will. Some customers, we do it within 5 weeks, end to end, just because they have all the right ports open, they have all the right servers. But once again, it really starts off with kind of the 6 stages that we had talked about, right? Scope and project initiation. You want to know what your use cases are, reviewing current environments. As you showed in an earlier stage, we can do email, endpoint, cloud. So knowing, where do you want to start, where do you want to end with. The installation and configuration, I say it all the time to our customers, that is the easy part. I can do an install just because the way the product is built in less than few hours, to be honest, because there are things that are concurrent. A couple of days, for a large scale customer. So installation and configuration is really the easy part. It's really the planning beforehand to make sure we're deploying it at the right stages. And then, whether it's migrating from an existing environment, migrating your policies, monitoring and testing, especially if it's new, that's where I would really have customers take a long time. Because what you do want to do is you don't want to right off the bat have a block policy and stop business from occurring, especially if you don't have a DLP system in place. And that can add complexity, and that can really, it's more of a one step forward, two steps back. So what we're really trying to do, because it is 16 weeks, help with them in terms of monitoring, testing, monitoring and testing, iterations of fine tuning the rules to make sure when we do add beyond just audit, whether it's a confirm option, whether it's notify or just block, it's blocking the right things.
Great. In the context of scope and project initiation, that's where we're going to be starting off with and talking about this deployment. It is really interesting how it stands out to me as far as you have effectively a 10-week out of 16 weeks dedicated to that whole just on scope and project initiation. Why you had mentioned the measure twice, cut once analogy, which I think is a great analogy for this kind of deployment. But I think what other things about it is requiring that kind of time, do you think?
Yeah, no, great question. If I'm starting off with a project or a DLP solution that I never really have had, and I am even a mid-sized company, I do want to have everybody on the same page and everybody understand the end goal of what we're trying to accomplish. So a lot of times, Kevin, it's just that bridging that knowledge gap. It's getting rid of the, oh, it's complex mentality, or it's sort of educating all the stuff that we can do, all the stuff, even if we can do it, should we do it? And then helping prioritize a lot of that stuff. And that won't happen. And what we've seen is you're not going to get comfortable with this in a 2-hour demo. You may see the functionality, but it really does take some time, because we also want to make sure you're doing your own job, right? Especially if you're a small firm or a large firm. So it's planning and architecture, making sure everybody's on the same page. And that really does help, because everybody doesn't feel frustrated and feels engaged that they are part of this program, if you will.
It's the challenge. It's the challenge of engaging the right group. I mean, that sounds like that takes quite a lot of time, and make sure they understand where they're going, and getting feedback and getting them involved is a super important part of this as far
Absolutely.
as the DLP deployment.
Technically, I can deploy the product like this, but
yeah,
what return on investment, do you really want to see? Do you really want to show data exfiltration happening and sort of stop that malicious user, or making sure you're compliant? That is really what we're trying to, and that's certainly the customers that I love working with. Because yeah, like you said, if I took out the planning and architecture, I can size it up right now, and we can do it in a couple of weeks just by deploying and turning on some out-of-the-box policies.
Right. It just won't be effective. It won't accomplish. It wouldn't be successful. No. I mean, as far as creating real security for the company. Mm-hmm. Here's this next step, as far as, or part of this first step, understanding your data. Can you maybe talk to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is super important. Understanding what to protect, what to secure, what's not important to secure is really important. How to identify and follow it. We've had sometimes customers saying, "Oh, I want to scan this file share. It's a large file share, and okay, well, what do you want to scan it for?" Well, we want to scan it for PCI, credit cards. Okay, well, what are you going to find? Well, we expect to find PCI and credit cards. And I'm scratching my head thinking, wait a minute, you're scanning a folder that's supposed to contain PCI data for PCI data, and you're just going to create incidents. So that's not really important. It's certainly important to make sure access control in that sense, but is it really important from an exfiltration perspective? So understanding your data, how it's being used, who is using it, who's the author, how often it's being manipulated, is it static, dynamic, when is it important enough for me to fingerprint, or can I use it predefined? Understanding those types of data is really important, because at the end of the day, it's data and people. You're working with the people, getting their input, and then understanding, what type of data you want to protect. It helps with policy efficacy, and it certainly helps with, sort of narrowing your scope.
So it sounds like it's being focused or focusing down on what is the data you're looking to protect. I think particularly too, it sounds like with this last point about identification, data identification, that's and I've heard that from customers and analysts. It's a big challenge as far as doing data discovery, and particularly when you've got unstructured data. There's, where is that data? What does it look like? How do we identify it? Is a big challenge, and having a tool that's going to enable that, it seems like that's critical.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think you want to use your employees. They're your sort of your best friends, but also sometimes your weakest link, as I like to say. So educating them on how to classify the data, how to tag that particular, spreadsheet or Word doc. What is work product versus personal product, maybe on a work machine? What is private or public or sensitive documents? Really training them as well, because then you'll have sort of a small army of people that know, okay, this data is protected, and this is, how, and they'll understand. So it's not just from a security perspective or IT perspective, understanding the data. It's also about educating sort of your end users on what data is important to the company and how it should be protected.
Yeah. Well, it seems to kind of go into this next step as far as the policy lifecycle whiteboarding part, working with your users. How does this all work?
Yeah. So this is probably my most favorite part of the job. And it's really just talking to customers. And before it was in-person whiteboarding. Now it's sort of that virtual whiteboard, and it's really starting off with that blank slate if you don't have a clear idea. Now we have some markers that says, based on your vertical industry, what are some compliances, what are some IP protections that their customers have used. But really, this is an exercise where you work with not just, and what I mean by partners, that's an overall encompassing term. Partners does include your HR business partner, your marketing folks, your compliance partner. So within the company and externally, if you have third-party vendors that you work with. But partner is also subject matter experts that are helping you guide through the discussion of what data is important. How are my users connecting to that data and using it and exfiltrating it? What are my concerns? Is it going to be reputational concern? Is it going to be financial loss? Current status of that data? What are business outcomes? And those are really key questions to ask. Start, because once you've kind of put things in these types of buckets or these types of sort of matrix, it really does help us prioritize and deploy very quickly. Because what we don't want to do is have a choppy deployment sort of in the middle. We want to get at least 5, 6, 7 high priorities sort of in matrix, teach everybody how those exercises work, and then have them continue on as they get new use cases.
Yeah, it's a great way to engage that broader group, right, and bring them all involved. Yeah, which is great. Looking at this next slide, it's a particularly interesting slide with respect to Forcepoint and our ability within that aspect of data identification that we were talking about earlier. Just that we have over 1,500 predefined policies and templates for customers, and we're able to take them from keywords, regular expressions, and file types, which is often common in a lot of DLP deployments, but it's a lot of work. But we've got, again, we have a lot that we can work with to help automate it, or it's predefined. Classification labels, as far as either like a Microsoft Information Protection or Bolden James classification product, as well as we'll work with others. We also have natural language scripting that we've developed for our customers. We have machine learning where you can test or you can teach your solution in terms of particularly around that unstructured data. And then precise ID fingerprinting. The fingerprinting aspect, we're probably, I believe we're the top in terms of the leading industry DLP solutions around this aspect of fingerprinting, which is an incredible way to get very strong precision. Abdul, what are your thoughts as far as this triangle and how this helps our customers be able to identify and understand the value of their data and where their data is?
Yeah. No, I think it's a wonderful slide because this, really helps understand all the different tools in my toolbox that make up a rule set. Like I said, there's, over 1,500 or so predefined scripts, phrases already kind of in the system built in based on your industry, based on your location as well. It's, for example, a credit card number isn't just a simple lunch check. It goes much more beyond it. It looks at, keywords in and around perhaps that number to look for, is it a true credit card number or not? But then also someone trying to obfuscate it. I do want to say there's a big piece for keywords, regular expressions, and national NLP scripts. That's really what we use the most initially. A lot of customers want to fingerprint because they're like, oh yeah, it's fingerprint. That's the most accurate. But it's on the top for a reason, not just because it's certainly the more accurate, but that's really the amount of documents, data that you do want to fingerprint. I think the industry average is anywhere between 2 to 3% of your overall documents that you want to fingerprint. It's a sliding scale, just depending on what your item. So what we want to do is have customers exposed to the variety of ways you can create policies. It's not just simple regex or keywords. But then let's talk back towards the use cases, and then we can use this to build really granular policies, granular rules, and then have those detections go out to the endpoint, the cloud, network, email, etc., and even pushing fingerprint down to the endpoint itself.
Yeah, as you just mentioned, as far as down these channels, this is also speaks to once you've identified the channels, then how you're going to look at the various levels of risk, and then how you have this ability to sense kind of sensitive, precise ability to apply enforcement. What are your thoughts on this as far as how this works and how a customer gets to this?
Yeah, so not all incidents are the same, right? I use my laptop to sometimes pay my bills and order lunch. So I'm putting in my credit card, my address, my name. Now, technically, that can be considered it is PCI by all standards. However, is that an incident that needs to be taken care of? No, absolutely not. If HR is, having an onboarding for a new hire and they're collecting their tax information and sending it to finance or payroll, is that an incident? No. So how do I understand what is critical? Now, if I'm trying to send out, 5, 15, 20 credit card numbers, okay, yeah, that's, a little bit different. That's more of a incident. So let's go ahead and trigger those. So it's really about, severity of those incidents itself. And then, like I said, what actions do you want to take, and also what notification you want to take. I've used an example of email. Let's encrypt it, right? If I'm sending a secure data to a partner or whatever, let's encrypt the data. Let's go ahead and do it. I don't need to worry about it. But maybe I'm sending out a lot of different passwords, or let's quarantine it and let's notify, the incident, cybersecurity incident person. But let's say the cybersecurity incident person is doing the activity. Let's go ahead and notify maybe the CIO, if you will. So it's also like watching the watcher. if you will. So that's where some of those incidents responses can come into play, where, look, this person is much more sensitive or has more access to sensitive data. So we want to trigger it a little bit high. And that's really what we mean. It's not all incidents are the same. It's what we want to do is create that logical step.
Yeah, it is very interesting too, as far as when you had mentioned email as an example, and you look and see how the treatment at various levels is distinct. There's distinct things you just do in email as far as the channel, whether it's dropping email attachments, using encryption, doing quarantining. There's those, some of those are relatively unique, to that channel versus some of the other ones. But it's the ability to be able to sensitively apply enforcement is critical, and then identifying that as well. This one goes into more just that workflow of incidents. Can you maybe speak to that?
Yeah. So this is kind of talking about after a policy has triggered, right? So I think we do spend quite a bit of time. I'm guilty of that too, of spending too much time on trying to perfect the right policy. Well, there's no such thing as a perfect policy. There are, perhaps really great policies, but so there's invariably going to be incidents. So how do I create a process sort of on the other side of the coin? In terms of when an incident occurs, does everybody know their rules and responsibilities, from fine tuning if it's a false positive, or updating the policy if it's a false negative, or if it's a true positive, how do I want to triage that incident appropriately? Do I need to notify the manager? Do I need to notify HR, legal? So sort of that severity of that. One of the items, and certainly you can automate a lot of this stuff, right? So a lot of the things that we've shown, example that we've had recently with a healthcare customer is, they're doing a lot of COVID research, and they're trying to, use Box and Dropbox, so trying to get data up to the cloud. And there are researchers that are using sensitive, patient data, surveys, etc. And that may have legal consequences because it is patient data that may trigger internal audit or HR, but they have the right, because they're researchers, to upload those sensitive data to Dropbox so other researchers in different parts of the world can see it. What you don't want to do is just use sort of a web gateway and just block access. You want to look at that content itself. And that's really where that DLP policies come into play. So when we have the policy to look at that content while it's being uploaded to the cloud, well, look, if a researcher accidentally sent something where he wasn't supposed to, or uploaded it to maybe a competitor, well, I want to notify, this type of data to maybe legal, HR, or beyond just the manager, if you will. Right. So it's really about what does that enforcement look like on the other hand.
Yeah, it sounds like this is an iterative type of process as well. Mm-hmm. It's that as you do your DLP deployment and you set this up, there'll be things initially you'll see in terms of your incidents, and then ultimately you'll still continue in this process. That's never going to change. But the thing is, how efficiently we're able to get you to that. We do have this here as far as the overall life cycle for policies. I don't think you need to maybe go into all the details on this, but just in general, what are your thoughts as far as how this applies to policy lifecycle?
Yeah, so this is just kind of, when we talked about when we do a whiteboard exercise, you can't really take a whiteboard and, take a screenshot of it and say, look, here are your policies. No, you want to make sure we put it into a place where you know what type of data it is, you know how it's being used, you know what, action plans you want to do it. And then you want to prioritize. So in here we have Social Security and individual taxpayer number. That's the priority. After that, it's payment card, PCI, then it's PHI, then it's financial and banking information. This is sort of their order of precedent. These are the types of data. So this is sort of what sort of that matrix looks like after the whiteboard session. Okay,
so you get this all identified, and then it sounds like then is we would be able to go into the tool, the DLP tool. This is showing, there's a list of the policies over to the left that people can check into and then drill down into based on their business. This is also showing the geography aspect. Really, that's particularly relevant around compliance. It seems like. So it's like if we're considering compliance, what countries are we needing to be concerned about, work with? Where is our business actually happening? And it is interesting, even with the USA, as far as you can go down to the state level, as far as in some of these down to state levels, and get to state level regulations as well to make sure you've set up that compliance aspect.
Yeah, no, I mean, California is definitely, one of the big ones where, there's,
right.
There could be a small customer that's not doing business in, any of the 50 states. They may be doing business in just sort of the South, if you will, right?
Right.
So driver's license numbers is different between Texas and Louisiana and Oklahoma, et cetera. So maybe that's all I need to check, because, you don't want to boil the ocean. You don't want to throw out that wide net. So you can really get that granularity to make sure what is the data that's important to me and how it's being used.
That's great. You do also have, as you had mentioned a little bit, as far as on the like with healthcare, we have a number of different industries. Some of the industry regulations would not be important for your business. Others are critical for your business, and so we're able to help you drill down in terms of your policy for that. This one's interesting too, as far as just looking at credit cards, and just like credit cards is widely, among many businesses, that's an important factor that they need to consider. We have this one over to the right where it's the default for credit cards, and it's kind of the wide net. If you were to go for a smaller net or more refined credit card policy, how would you go about that?
Yeah. So I mean, there's different practices. You definitely want to start off with the default one, but you can tune things by adding, credit card number by itself perhaps may not be that important, but if it's a credit card number tied to a name and an address, well, that's a bit more important. There's definitely many ways to obfuscate a credit card number as well, just by writing it out or changing some digits. So, we can definitely use default, narrow. We can add in different types of Boolean logic as well to make sure the policy, the efficacy of the policy is high. And, once again, knowing your data, right? It's how is the data being used? Is somebody ordering lunch really that important, even though I'm getting the credit card number and address and name? No, you don't want to know what Abdul's having for lunch or Kevin. But if I'm maybe sending out 5 credit cards every hour, well, I want to maybe enable drip DLP and go to sort of see that slow leak over time. And maybe then it moves from sort of a medium or a low severity to a high severity, because now, wait a minute, that's not normal business practice.
Right. One other one as far as policies, this is looking at the channel specifically. So it's being able to drill down into network, endpoint. There's email as well. So do you have any thoughts on that as far as how the customer would be looking at this in terms of channels?
Yeah, it's so we're trying to kind of show, like, you don't want to do block all, right? Especially at the beginning, if you're, as you're starting off with DLP, this can get really granular. So, usually we start off with audit. Maybe we can do quarantine or encrypt. But it's you have choices, and sort of that's once again kind of ties back to what are your use cases, what are your outcomes, deadlines. So let's make sure you're selecting the right choice. Eventually, you do want to get to a block stage, but don't make it complex for yourself. Let's start off with audit only and just see what type of exfiltration is happening.
Right. And it's great too, as far as, like you're saying, start back more towards the audit side of things. We want to look and see the behavior, and then start applying the breaks, the block where it's relevant. There is also this is again showing the across multiple channels, just looking at the email, web, the DLP cloud services. And then it does go down, across other ones throughout the endpoints, printing, specific applications across the endpoint, the removal of media. So like, thumb drives, having some visibility to that, endpoint LAN. So you have a lot of different tools in terms of that policy visibility.
Yeah, and just to kind of highlight this, if I'm truly a bad actor, Kevin, right? Even in audit policy, enabling different channels or destinations is important, because if I got that blog page, that's not going to perhaps dissuade me. So I'm going to try and find maybe different holes to try and exfiltrate the data, maliciously or maliciously. So once again, having that audit and just sort of seeing where that data exfiltration is happening, and then enabling a lot of the different applications, and from email or from FTP even, or web, really kind of builds that case as well. Like, you know what? Okay, yeah, this is maybe a person of interest, etc., or not.
Yeah, that's great. The now moving ahead, as far as within the whole aspect of deployment, you finally get to this deploying it. Maybe you can speak to that as far as just your initial steps as you get into deployment finally.
Yeah, so a lot of that what we talked about, right? It's certainly ongoing, right? It can happen as anywhere between a couple of weeks to really, it can take 10 weeks. But from a deployment perspective, there's very easy, like I said, it's easy to install. Certainly the support is there to get every ounce of value, right? Because we do want you to use machine learning, we do want you to use fingerprinting, but use it properly, use it responsibly. So having documents that knows, okay, this is what my procedure looks like, this is what my steps look like, installation, configuration, having your AD in, user acceptance testing, those are kind of the initial deployment phase, right? And like I said, once we can start off with the endpoint, and then branch off to email channel, or maybe the cloud, and then network. So it really just depends on where we feel that we're going to get the most value, and sort of the biggest visibility.
Okay. And then you talk about these cutting over to production, actually getting into that. How does that work?
Yeah, so when we talked about earlier on the sort of we want to do monitoring and testing. So whenever we feel ready that yes, what, the policy is in a good stage, even though it's audit, what we don't want to do is create a lot of false positives. We'll do maybe 1 or 2 iterations of tuning. That's pretty normal, and then we'll just cut over to production traffic. Email is pretty simple. You change your domains or networks, IPs, or push out the endpoints using SCCM or Jamf, if you have Mac. So it's really just about perhaps starting from a small region or stage environment that encompasses your entire microcosm of your company, different business units, and then just rolling it out to perhaps different regions or company-wide, if you will.
Great. There's this last part of as far as going into this aspect of training and education. Now, how does that work? How do we complete that part?
Yeah, so certainly the knowledge transfer is throughout the entirety of the environment. But once we've deployed the product within customer's own environment, one of the things that we love doing is performing tabletop exercises. When we showed that sort of framework of how policy is written and then incidents, we want to have those incidents and those stakeholders sitting in the table virtually. And then whenever incident happens, everybody knows their roles. Whenever creating a new policy, everybody knows their roles and what their point of view is. And that's really the important part of exercises. Same thing if it's only 2 people, know your role from a system level and know your role from a policy level. And that's what we're trying to do. Simplify, remove any ambiguity with amongst the stakeholders, and then expose them to the knowledge base articles within our support portal. And then at the end of the day, signed off, right? It's your system. I want you to be comfortable with it, and make it a little bit less of a frustration.
Great. So you've made it. You've got to the completed deployment. There still is going to be continued work. There still is the knowledge base the customers will have exposure to. There's engagement still with support. So there's there's that iteration effect that we talked about earlier as you fine tune and strengthen it. Yeah. Looking ahead, we talk about the future roadmap. Just that there is other aspects. You had talked about starting maybe with endpoint and email, but then looking forward to wanting to deploy it across all your channels. We're able to enable that. There is some other things. Maybe you could talk to this as far as just some other things that customers would want to consider in terms of their future moving ahead with their DLP deployments.
Yeah. So DLP, like we talked about at the beginning, it's a business. Also, it's not just a simple, I'm setting up a firewall or I'm setting up a new router. It is a true business-driven item, and it shows this really shows kind of all the different areas where we can connect with, built in that intelligence, built in that granularity to make sure our DLP policies are sort of applied across the different channels, and it's using CrowdStrike, using what's in your Splunk, using Bolt and James to really enhance one and the other. So this is sort of when you feel like you have a really good DLP program, sort of what that next iteration looks like as well, not just from a policy perspective, but then integration with other third-party solutions.
Right. That's great. And you can make a very powerful, like really increase your email channel, threat incident visibility and control, any of these other channels just through some of these partnerships. There is this one other area that often people consider after they've done their initial DLP, but it's one that's quite powerful as far as helping customers understand the context of a lot of incidents. Can you maybe talk to this as far as how this works?
Yeah, so I'm absolutely really excited about kind of the risk adaptive piece of it, because it's really does, what I talked about, looks at a maybe not an incident at a point in time, but perhaps collection of incidents. I can go into very granular policies, and it looks at behaviors as well and tries to map it with your department and maybe the company overall. And then it provides you with sort of a risk score of, okay, is this a normal course of behavior? And then you can take automated actions. So, let's say people's behaviors don't change. So, I am doing the exact same thing, but all of a sudden, I am now downloading large stuff to my USB. And you know what? It's slowly tracking. Okay, wait a minute. Abdul's risk score is going up a little bit more. As it goes up, let's go ahead and continue creating that barrier of maybe, okay, initially, let's just encrypt the data. So in case I lose a USB. But if I'm continually doing it and that's not part of my normal MO, then maybe I need to block it and notify because something might be happening. So this is all about that automated response and risk score, and then taking that response based on the risk. So instead of, once again, just blocking USB and having people be frustrated, allow USB, encrypt it. So if the data gets lost, you know what? No one's the wiser. But then, you know what? If someone is doing something that's perhaps outside of the norm, let's go ahead and notify. Let's check up on that. And it's about finding, I would say, the sharpest needle within the haystack.
Yeah, it's interesting, this way of watching the user. And like within this illustration here, it's like this is the first 30 days that they did, like you had mentioned, the stockpiling on a USB drive. This is on a local drive. Then they, some attachments to a personal, they sent to a personal account that kind of raised their risk score. They're still not considered critical, but then, maybe the 30 days go by, their risk score goes down, but then they start doing some other things. They upload to the USB drive again. There's an attempt to uninstall the DLP agent, which would be considered pretty serious. And then just like a huge attachment attempt as far as to sending stuff out to the cloud, which puts them into the critical risk. And so then it's like you already had your policies that you had and enforcement and what you should block, what you should encrypt, what you should do. But the thing is, when you have this one individual that's already in a critical state, they may be all blocked at that point, as far as that's the way it is. So you get this additional context so that it's, you're able to focus down in potentially hundreds of incidents and really focus down to where are we getting exfiltration and proactively going after those situations, which is it's pretty interesting. This here is talks to just, we have just a number of customers that we're engaged with. Maybe you could speak to that just as far as just the range of types of deployments you do, sizes, industries, any of that.
Yeah. So each customer has sort of their own story, each challenges and different verticals, right? I mean, it could be anywhere between consumer-based to business-driven, healthcare, finance, manufacturing. So not only is compliance, but I have public sensitive information, financial information that shouldn't really be released before maybe my quarter earnings call, if you will. So these are different, unique policies and rules and footprints for these customers that we've deployed with, and each of them sort of have unique challenges. It just kind of to show that it's if it fits a lot of these customers, there's a way to sort of fit it into your area, and we can have that granularity.
Right. One thing I maybe talk really briefly to is just a matter of size of customers. How small a customer do we do deployments with versus how large are we able to scale up to? What have you seen in that area?
Yeah, so I mean, we've seen like that one of the largest customers on here goes to 400,000 or so, and I mean I've personally deployed it to 300 user hedge fund. So hedge funds tend to have a lot of
important data.
A lot of important data, but by user count, Kevin, they're not that very big. It could be a small mom and pop. So
right.
Conversely, you can have a manufacturing company that's perhaps 60,000, 100,000, but really a lot of the people maybe in the factory or the floor, they don't have access to particular data. So it's that variety once again. And what we try to do is look at what your industry is and really have you guys ask yourself, what is important to us? And I guarantee all these customers are constantly asking themselves, what data is important to me? Some of them have a very mature DLP program and processing in place, but they all are always asking, what data is important? Why is it important? How is it being used? And then creating those avenues for monitoring but allowing businesses to continue.
Great. Just really quickly too on this, is just across the bottom, you see the different awards we've won, different places where analysts have recognized us. We were 9 times Gartner Magic Quadrant leader for DLP. Frost & Sullivan this year in APAC, they recognized Forcepoint as the data loss prevention company of the year. And then also, we have Gartner Peer Insights, we're a customer choice there. We're with Radicati Group, we're a top player. So we have a number of different recognitions across the industry looking at us and seeing that Forcepoint has the right product, really. And not to just boast in that, but the idea that we're in a position where we can help you as a customer to be able to be successful in getting a DLP deployment that will give you strong data security. Here's just a list of some takeaways. Could you maybe briefly just address these, Abdul, as far as what you see are kind of the highlights in this?
Yeah, this is sort of the distilled version, right? So it's really, I think at the end of the day, having clear goals and use cases, knowing kind of what your outcomes need to be, identifying core teams of stakeholders because it is a business-driven solution, understanding your data, how it's being used, where it's being resided, and what do you want to do with it. Deployment in stages, right? By region, by department, by channels, whether it's endpoint or email or network or cloud. Plan for future though. Plan for future growth, right? You said even after we finish the deployment, perhaps of just a couple of regions, doesn't mean, right, it's over. Like, let's expand, let's mature. What does that look like? And we showed that slide of a risk adaptive as well as integration with third party. At the end of the day, it's sort of what is right for me as a customer, what will help me get to my end goal and outcome, and really demystify sort of the DLP deployment and bridge that knowledge gap. And certainly I think those are the right questions to ask if I was the customer.
Great. Well, again, we want to thank you as far as people who are watching this. Thank you for your time in going through this with us and looking at the deployments. If you are interested in a live demo of Forcepoint DLP, certainly go out to forcepoint.com/DLP and sign up for a live demo. Someone can be able to show you some of these things, particularly around the policies and all of that, and talk you through your specific needs, your specific situation. and how to deploy that. I do want to thank Abdul as well for joining us, taking time out from the professional services to be able to talk us through this way of making a very complex deployment simplified for our customers.
Yeah, perfect. Thanks, Kevin. Yeah, always a pleasure. And we'll do this again soon. Thanks.
Real good. Thanks.